Hey everybody, this is a response video to Dark Age of, who made a video with three questions, and one of those questions really intrigued me, and that was a question of which film director's style, encompasses a lot of what your style is about as a GM. As a GM, which film director's style would you compare your game's style to? And being a big movie buff, that of course immediately made sparks fly in my head, kind of like, oh, I want to dive deeper into this. And that's an interesting subject because both are storytelling mediums, but they're very different storytelling mediums. Of course, Dark Age of also added that if you come up with any like authors or anything like that, or maybe you could say musicians or anything like that, any sort of other kind of storyteller other than a role-playing storyteller would you compare your style to? And when it comes to movies, there's a lot of stuff you could really pull into this. I'm pretty sure if you would be playing a role-playing game with a new dungeon master and they would describe their style as something close to the Coen brothers films or something, you would get a very clear image of, okay, there's going to be like a lot of like tensions are going to be high. There's a lot of comedic tension from grand plans going awry. You might be bank robbers, you might be musicians, you might be something usually having to do with some sort of grand endeavor, and then everything like falling the wayside, and the comedic elements arriving from all the rising tensions and social kind of conflicts and stuff that arise from that, and then if a game master would describe their games as very similar to David Lean movies, perhaps you would know that, okay, these are going to be like history making, grand scale, invasions to foreign countries, and redrawing maps, and national heroes and delegations, and spanning great spans of time, and these kind of grand endeavors. There's a lot of different directors that would spark that sort of imagination and a clear kind of image into your head of what sort of thing we're diving into. When I'm thinking about my style, there's lots of different things that have inspired me with my style that I wouldn't necessarily say my end product, what my stories and what my games kind of tones are and such, would really be very good comparisons to. For example, Werner Herzog is one of those directors that is a great inspiration in a lot of creative endeavors for me, but I don't think my games are very Werner Herzog-like. But for example, I was once, drawing and painting some of my Warhammer miniatures and stuff, and I decided to put on the background a lot of Werner Herzog films rolling with the director's commentary track playing on them. And when I listen to him describe a lot of the things that is seen on screen, not just his relationships with different actors and this and that, the other thing, but really going into detail on describing what sort of what he was going for with a certain angle of the camera, the certain lighting, the certain music cues, the certain expressions on the actors' faces, and a lot of those things, they really made this kind of visual imagination through narration kind of flourish in my head, where every one of us has some sense of visual imagination, of course, but it's always different because we all have different kind of aesthetic tastes. And a lot of times when I run games these days, after listening to Werner Herzog describe stuff, after reading books like the Song of Ice and Fire books by George R.R. Martin, or stuff like The Heart of Darkness and things like that, those kind of styles of describing things and describing what you see, what everything feels like, what the air smells like, what the thoughts that are racing through your head kind of are. That kind of way of describing things was very palatable to me, and it influenced a lot of my style of role-playing. But I don't think any of those, whether it's Werner Herzog films, whether it's Heart of Darkness or the Song of Ice and Fire books, I don't think any of those really reflect what my games themselves, wind up resembling. I would say that when I think of directors whose work my games resemble and who I might invoke, whose names I might invoke to a new player, like, yeah, my games often have like tones like this and that, the other kind of thing. I think the directors that I came up with were Robert Rodriguez. If you think of El Mariachi and Desperado, for example, if you think of From Dusk Till Dawn and all sorts of other movies that he's done, Sin City, Planet Terror, all sorts of movies like that. The kind of sense of action and the kind of rule of cool in those kind of action scenes where if you're describing like, oh, bad guys are coming in and pop, 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 you're banging off the bad guys and stuff like that. Everything is moving quickly and all that sort of thing. And then somebody would like stop the flow on its tracks because you can't use a suppressor in a revolver. Man, that's unrealistic. It doesn't work. It's like, shut the hell up. It's cool. It's cool. Like, don't mind it. It's neat. Like, just see somebody with a revolver do all the things and all the cool, nifty things, but it also has a kind of movie thing. Even that whole is not realistic. That's not what suppressed pistols sound like. But it's like, I think Robert Rodriguez's style of putting kind of cool ahead of what's actually plausible and how things work, and letting kind of players know that that's kind of what my games go for, where they feel comfortable just jumping on that, that bar table and like whipping their pistols as they're shooting and all these kind of things. It kind of gives them that kind of air where they don't have to always think that, okay, any stray bullet can just straight up kill me, so I better use caution and be smart about this. It's oftentimes that action I tend to lean to doing stuff in a cool way. Also, Robert Rodriguez's movies often they often have like a lot of comedic sidekicks. A lot of side characters have quirks and speech patterns and silly things about them that really like reflects a lot of my style. My games are filled with comedic side characters that are there to kind of alleviate the tension and just to make things seem like, okay, don't take things too seriously, where I'll leave maybe the main bad guy as somebody serious, but he'll have a lot of goons that are just plain silly, and another director that came to my mind alongside Robert Rodriguez is Nicholas Winding Refn, the Danish director who made, for example, Drive is perhaps his most famous film. But movies like Only God Forgives and, let's say, Valhalla Rising, those two movies are movies where the use of visuals alongside of music cues to really build tension and tone and atmosphere, that's really something that I've lately in my, let's say, the last few campaigns that I've ran have really incorporated into my gaming. Just like I said about the heavy descriptions early on, I really like taking in scenes where there's no hurry anywhere, where you can just kind of sit and describe stuff. I don't get to use music all that much in my games these days, so it's too bad that I can't really emulate a lot of the effects I see on movies, especially in some of the scenes in Valhalla Rising and in Only God Forgives, especially in Only God Forgives, where there's kind of like minimal dialogue and it's all about like moving pictures, these almost still pictures that have a lot of atmosphere and haunting music and all that to accompany them. That's often what I want to get across with my heavy descriptions. It's like if somebody is walking the streets, I might take the time to really describe what the rain feels like, what the air smells like, what the sounds your feet are making, what something reminds you of, what you see like a torn off newspaper flying in the breeze there, how the steam is coming from the sewer sidewalk sewer holes, and those rain drain, whatever those are called. English is failing me right now. Anyway, that's kind of what I'm going for with those descriptions, and what I relate with when I see movies where those kind of situations are going on, those slow scenes where you see something for a long time from a certain angle, and I imagine what the choice has been for that camera angle. Like, what are you trying to tell me through this? Is this angle and how everything is framed in the picture trying to signal some sort of message to me? Is it something that's obvious, or is it something where I kind of do need to take the time and just taking the music and taking the visual and kind of like, I see, this might be inside his head, I see, this kind of thing. Which usually comes with multiple viewings and such. But those are pretty much. I'd say maybe my players might have a different perspective, but I'd say that Robert Rodriguez and Nicholas Winding Refn are my biggest comparisons in style to movie directors. Another angle to this question that I kind of thought of immediately when I saw the question written down and what it was, is that, of course, I immediately realized that the question is going to be about the end product, about which directors' movies, your campaigns tend to resemble. But I also was thinking about, since I consume a lot of books about movie making, a lot of behind the scenes documentaries and such, I was thinking which directors' kind of methods of directing are comparable to yours. Because when you look at different directors, when you look at somebody like Stanley Kubrick, who would exhaust his actors with doing takes after takes after takes, just 50 freaking takes of somebody just lifting up the telephone or something, but he would be like a perfectionist in those kind of ways, and he would use a lot of techniques like exhausting his actors to get a certain result out of them. If an actor needs to be somebody who's on the edge, on the verge of kind of losing his shit, losing his patience and stuff, being scared or whatnot, he would be kind of manipulative in how he made his films, how he directed. He would make them go through multiple shots. He would exhaust them. He would be belligerent and assholish to them to piss them off legitimately, so that in his hopes that would carry into the performance done on camera. Whether that's successful or not, you could argue that, and whether somebody is a good enough of an actor where they don't need anything like that, kind of also could speak about the distrust of somebody's abilities as a director, by feeling like you have to go through something like that, where most directors don't do that with their actors. And then you could look at somebody like Robert Rodriguez or Tarantino or somebody like that, who are also very known for doing only one take of something. And Robert Rodriguez has made like entire courses of how you take shots where there's lots of flaws maybe, and you just keep the camera rolling, and then through editing you can make that really work, where you don't have to go into big expenses in movie making and waste film by doing take after take after take, where you can take an okay take and kind of salvage that. And a lot of behind the scenes stuff also when it comes to Tarantino and stuff, where an actor will do a stunt only once or something like that. He'll like, oh, that's fine, let's just move on and get a lot of work done in a single day and not have to do a lot of reshoots and stuff like that. That's certainly like those are kind of methods of directing that could be kind of comparable perhaps to how you deal with your players and how you handle them. when you look at somebody like Werner Herzog, he's somebody who really likes to recruit a lot of extras who are legitimate eccentrics and interesting people that just locally pop up, and then he gets so fond of them that he populates his entire story with these extras who are not actors but who are interesting people. They have interesting faces, they have interesting ways of speaking, they have lots of different things about them. They make them interesting. Lots of handicapped people and people like that are shown in his films oftentimes, because he just finds these people very interesting. And there's only like one or two like actual stars in his films, and the rest are just non-actors who are just interesting. If you look at his documentary, The White Diamond, that documentary is supposed to be about this guy who's trying to resurrect the kind of hot air ballooning thing with his own unique design of a hot air balloon. But one of the people in the crew who are making this, who are just carrying stuff, is such a sage. He just, when it comes down to cigarette breaks and stuff, he just talks all about this kind of deep, kind of eccentric, weird stuff, about this and that. And Herzog is just like glued onto this person, just like, oh, I'm gonna make him the focal point of my documentary. It's like, who cares about hot air balloons when you have this interesting fellow here? You could kind of find comparable things with stuff like that. I was also thinking about Tarantino when I was thinking about the end products of the directors matching your end product as a GM, because of how many references he has in his games. And I shove Conan the Barbarian references and other movie references everywhere in my games. But then again, I was thinking about the quality of his dialogue and the quality of my games, NPC dialogue, and I kind of thought that I'm not going to mention Tarantino as one of those people whose stuff my games resemble. But anyway, maybe there would be something to kind of dig from that if you're somebody who kind of devours a lot of these behind-the-scenes things where you find out about different directors' methods of directing. That might be something to kind of get into and try and maybe convert somehow into how a GM works. I have no answers in that perspective of how I work compared to how some directors work. Maybe because it's such a kind of in the field kind of thing. You're physically doing stuff. You're at location and you have to do this and that, the other thing. There's a lot of coordinating and logistics involved with that. So it's not the same as sitting around a table and just kind of throwing out ideas and descriptions and that sort of performances, So that's kind of a wild idea. Maybe you can take something away from that, or I don't know. But because this is a response video, I don't want to just focus on this one question, even though it's the main thing that interested me and made me want to make a response video. He also had two other questions, which were his main focal points, and this movie thing was kind of an add-on kind of thing, like here's a little goof on top of these questions. And his questions were, what's your greatest weakness as a player and as a GM? And I think my biggest weaknesses aren't always. There's a lot of things that I would have described as a weakness earlier on in my kind of role-playing career, but as time has passed, I've noticed that a lot of things I thought were glaring weaknesses were actually more just about preference. Because a lot of times when a player tells me that they wish there was more of something in my games that was lacking, when I play in their games, it's usually the thing they wish there was more in my games is the focal point of their style. If somebody wished there was more die rolls, when I get to play their games, it's full of die rolls. Everything is decided on a die roll and stuff. If somebody wishes for a slower pace, their games tend to be extremely slow paced. If somebody wishes for more humor, their games are filled with humor. It's usually about preferences like that. And of course, I know what I like, and if my players know my style, they'll flock to me anyway. If our styles don't. automatic, like 100%, mash up. If there's some shortages, I'm still people still I'm sure people still want to play in my games regardless. But there are things that I wish I was better at. They're not perhaps weaknesses, but there are things that I wish I was better at, and they are pretty much the same thing as a GM and as a player, and that's variety of improvisational kind of output that I have. I have too many times I've kind of noticed that I have certain go-to things when it comes time to improvise, whether it's when I'm a player or when I'm a GM. When I'm a GM, it's often with those comedic side characters that I mentioned of the Robert Rodriguez movies and stuff. A lot of times, a lot of this "come on in, pussy lovers" and these sort of characters kind of tend to pop up when I get insecure about whether or not the pace is moving at a good pace or at a good kind of whether or not a scene has some steam in it, whether or not there's kind of an awkward silence of players just not describing what they're doing and stuff. Comedy is often this kind of way of coping with those kind of things. Oftentimes, just like in social situations, when it comes time to for a uncomfortable silence or something like that, usually a lot of people use comedy to kind of break that uncomfortableness and that tension or something like that. And I feel like I do that sometimes in when I'm game mastering quite a lot, and too much sometimes, to where I lament making a side character too comedic when I would have wanted them to be more serious, perhaps. It's kind of like it's something that I almost always notice in theater as well, where a lot of times it seems like directors often kind of feel safe in the realm of comedy because when you get somebody to laugh, you get an immediate positive response. You get an immediate acknowledgement that people are enjoying themselves, So sometimes that can be kind of detrimental, and it can be kind of a thing where you realize every time that happens that, oh, okay, well, I guess he went for a comedy again. Maybe that's just something that's in my own head, and I overanalyze what I do myself, and thereby feel more critical over that when I do it than my actual players do or viewers when it's a broadcast session. But that's something I wish I had more variety in. I always kind of marvel at players and GMs who have a really good imagination. Like I feel Philippe Wangajira, Phil, who's been in a lot of my games, has an exceptional imagination when it comes to thinking on your feet and being improvisational. Like he's come up with completely off the wall cool things to do in sessions that just completely blow me away and I'm like, oh, that's such a cool idea. I can't make myself roll against that. It's like it works, man. That's cool, and I wish I would be as creative in that kind of thinking on your feet kind of way. The same thing goes when I'm a player. I think as well, my weakness as a player is that that I have these certain character kind of things that I go for when I'm playing a character. I oftentimes, no matter what kind of character I create on paper, my characters are often going to have a short temper, and they're usually going to have a violent side to them. It's this kind of thing where oftentimes when I'm backed into a corner, my characters will lose their temper and use violence to solve a situation. And one of my favorite kind of skills in any game is intimidation, mostly because I don't get to see that used too many times. It's something I would like to see done more often. Intimidation being used to solve situation, like not just threats, but just having that kind of presence of being somebody you don't want to look in the eye because you're too scared of them, and then you of course say yes to everything they want, kind of thing. But that's something I oftentimes, whether I'm playing a socialite, whether I'm playing a brute, whether I'm playing someone who's supposed to be like a Machiavellian schemer or something, I often find that when the going gets tough, the kind of go-to thing for me in improvisational and impulsive kind of ways, and not this kind of what would my character do, but in this kind of act kind of thing, it's usually losing one's temper and using violence and intimidation and threats and stuff like that. And that usually means that I wind up wanting to play half orcs in D&D and barbarians and brutes and thugs and these kind of characters, because then I feel relaxed in doing that because I know I most likely wind up doing that anyway. So I feel like, why not make a character where that's like a very very like natural thing for them to do as well. So that's often what I wind up doing, finding different ways of taking a character who has a short temper, a violent streak, and who's scary, and then kind of finding new ways to make that kind of base concept feel new and fresh when I make a new character for a new campaign. But that's kind of, again, something where I wish I had the tools to improvise and think on my feet with more imagination and variety. That's pretty much it. Those are my answers to all these questions. I have no idea how long this video wound up being, but hope you enjoyed it. See you another time. Bye.